Hi, everyone. Welcome to Behind the Scenes. My name is Robin Stafford, and I work with UVA Clubs. Tonight, I am so pleased to introduce Ben Baxter, class of 2000. Ben graduated from the architecture school, and it's also where he met his wife, Kathy. Ben, do you want to come on up? Great. They then headed to Atlanta after graduation, where Ben spent about 5 years in an architecture firm. And then next, he and Kathy and then their daughter Emmeline moved to Savannah, and he worked for about a decade in construction management. In 2017, Ben pursued his interest in plants, gardening, and garden design, and ultimately ran a fine gardening business. He gardens personally at their house in Isle of Hope, and we are going to start the program with some footage of Ben's garden, and then he takes us to visit the homes of two other alumni in the area. So we will see you back here after the video footage for some Q&A. Feel free to enter any questions in the chat below, and we'll get to as many as we can. And enjoy the video.
Hi, I'm Ben Baxter. Welcome to our house. My wife Kathy and I are School of Architecture. The Spanish. Noble Jones was a prominent landowner. He received a King's Grant and established Wormslow Plantation on the other side of the island. From there, it began to grow. Farms and other plantations were developed. And as we got into the kind of the early 1900s, it became a destination for people from the city to get out and get a little bit of the salt air. Our home here, we moved here in 2006 after some time in Atlanta. Kathy's from Savannah, grew up in Ardsley Park, and which is closer to downtown Savannah. She wanted to be out here. It's out of the path, and it's a nice place to sort of get away from the hustle and bustle of the city. And so we moved here, and the home was built in the mid 1800s. So it's got a lot of history, which attracted us. When we moved here, the garden was really just a lot of grass. There were several mature trees, some clipped shrubs but it was nothing like you see now. The back perimeter was just a chain link fence, and you could easily see into the neighbors. So I just started with a loose plan. And really I had about 3 phases of the life of the garden up until today. And the first phase, 5-6 years, was really focused on developing the border. My daughter Emmeline also really liked birds at a young age, and so everything that I put in had to provide some kind of habitat or berries for them to feed on or something like that. So that really sort of drove the initial parts of this garden. I then quickly got into vegetable gardening. We got chickens and built a chicken coop, and it was a lot of fun, and it started to sort of resemble a little farm out here, which I absolutely love. So Hurricane Matthew changed a lot. The following year, we had another hurricane threat. It wasn't quite as devastating and large, but it did cause us concern. We had 2 water oaks here, which are a notoriously weak tree, and they were leaning when we got back. We had evacuated. And so we decided that we needed to take those down. So this spot over here, under the shade of these oaks, was a great little shade garden. But all that obviously had changed when the trees came down. And so it was really at this point that I decided to redo how I was approaching the garden and introduce some more formal elements. You see the clipped boxwood and the podocarpus wall here. And the idea is to enclose this little space, like a little room within the garden, from the rest of the house, and really focus a lot of attention on the pond and the chicken coop back behind. So it's a nice little hideaway. We're here at the pond, and this went in phase 2. If you can imagine, those water oaks were here, so it was just on the edge of a real shady garden. It was lovely. The waterfall provided some nice background noise against the busy traffic on the street there. And we really enjoyed it, but what I couldn't get to grow was really any plant life, and it was because of the shade of the trees. So when those trees came down, everything just burst up. Ended up having to battle algae more regularly, but that's what the parrot feather here, which is this fluffy plant, provides a lot of cover, and it's that cutting down on the open surface area really drove down the algae problem. So things are quite happy in the pond. We've got a bunch of goldfish in there, and they have babies every year. So a nice little population. We also have lots of frogs, and I've seen a turtle floating around from time to time. So this is the chicken coop. Kind of the first major project that I started out here, and built it when Emmeline was very little, and it was lots of fun. She helped me gather nails. She was integral to the whole construction. But it was a wonderful experience, and we had anywhere from 6 to 17 chickens in our run. We currently don't have any right now. We had a raccoon incident several years ago, and it kind of wiped us out. So we took a pause on it, and we're reevaluating things. At some point, we will get the chickens back. But we really enjoyed having them. They brought a lot of life to the garden. It was fun to watch them scurry around, and getting eggs every day was also a treat. So this is an olive tree, which is growing olives is actually a business that's expanding here in Georgia. And this variety is Arbequina, and it's the one you'll most often find in the nurseries around here. They're very, very adaptable and amenable to pruning or letting them grow to their full size. So this one here, I'm just going to let it grow up, but we have several customers for whom that we actually would prune them into tight little balls or gumdrops or whatever, particularly fit the garden that it was in. But I really love it for its fine texture and silvery green color, and we're growing it to hopefully screen some of the garage here. The olives are edible. You have to brine them first, or they're absolutely terrible to taste. So here we are at one of our fig trees. This was a gift from a friend, and it was probably got to him from a friend and from another friend. It is a fig from Lambeth Palace in England, and I was given a little cutting of it, so it's grown up quite large and should get much more big than it is now. The fig at Lambeth Palace was planted in 1620 by the Roman Archbishop of Canterbury, and his name was Archbishop Reginald Pole, and it's a very significant tree there, and it has done I guess quite well. They'll die back in the winter a little bit here, so I can only imagine it must be in a very, very protected location because it has been around for a very, very long time. So we're very happy to have it. It's a white Marseille fig, which is different from our typical. It's larger and whiter than the brown turkey fig, which is what we have most commonly here in Savannah. So this is a banana shrub or banana tree. It's related to magnolias. Its botanical name is Magnolia figo, and it's evergreen. And the reason it's called what it is, the flower that it puts out is very similar in form to a magnolia flower. It's a very small, but its fragrance is that of kind of bananas or juicy fruit gum. And my wife had one in the house when she grew up, and so she absolutely loves it, and is excited to have it here. And it is hopefully going to grow up to 15 or 20 feet and provide a little screen on the garage. So I'm sure many of you will recognize this as it perennializes here in our garden. This patch of it that you're looking at probably started with anywhere between 6 and 12 little 1-gallon pots. This variety is Amistad. I think now, because things get remarketed, I think they call it Rockin' Purple or something to that effect. But it really does very, very well. The deer don't eat it, which is the reason that it's 5 feet tall. The bees love it. Hummingbirds will come and visit. And it's been great. It's been a lifesaver for me as far as just keeping color in the garden, because the deer are so aggressive here. There's not a whole lot that I can grow, but the salvia is wonderful. Cut it back after a freeze to 6 inches above the ground, and this patch here has probably been up and in bloom for about a month, so it comes on early and obviously comes on with a lot of vigor, so really, really enjoy it. Providing a good deal of the screening from the rest of the garden is this golden goddess bamboo, and it is a clumping bamboo, so it doesn't really spread. It'll do a little bit of growing, kind of expanding its clump, but it's been really easy to, effortless really, to control it. I haven't had any issues. The only maybe slight problem is that it's getting taller than it was supposed to, so it'll send some significant canes out, and it's just easily topped off. I just cut them down, but it's been pretty easy to maintain, and it provides a great screening for us. Come on in. All right, well, I'm really grateful to be able to share with you the home of Dale and Debbie Kreitz. Dale's an alum from 1980. This property is spectacular. I think the two qualities that I find most beautiful are the old, mature, stately live oaks, and then the river frontage. This type of setup, this siting, is very unique, I think, to Savannah and Isle of Hope, and it's absolutely gorgeous. You can see how they haven't overplanted. There's a lot of lawn, so that you get views from the house to the river, and a lot of, especially in Isle of Hope, but I think throughout Savannah, people really do engage with the waterways because there's so many of them. There's a lot of boating, a lot of fishing, and there's a lot of entertaining. And so you can see they have a fire pit over in this corner. So a great way to spend a cool fall evening by the river is with a fire. And they have a fire pit here. What was very unique, though, is that they were able to find an old iron syrup kettle that would have been used to make cane syrup back in the day, and they're using it as a liner for the fire pit, which is very practical, but at the same time like really unique and beautiful. So it's a wonderful, wonderful detail. Another thing we really enjoy here in Savannah are oyster roasts, and the traditional method is to build a wood fire, and over the wood fire to place a sheet of metal, steel or iron, place the oysters on top of that, so it's an indirect heating, and on top of the oysters place saltwater soaked burlap, and that's what provides the steaming. They definitely taste a lot better when you do it that way. I just wanted to add some detail to what you're looking at here. You just saw was Bluff Drive, and we're about to see again a little bit of the road to the crisis property. And this is what I find so unique about Isle of Hope is again this the access that you have to the waterways. It's really, really special. And the Bluff Drive that is in front of Sherry's house here is open to the public, so people enjoy walking back and forth and visiting with friends, making this community really, really special. They moved here 5-6 years ago, and my friend and mentor John McKellen was the designer, and I was on the install team. His design here is to take advantage of the porch, the views from the porch, and sitting and enjoying a breezy summer afternoon. Sherry is a wonderful gardener and really enjoys all the different varieties and of unique plants. And so John provided her with sort of a really interesting palette. These plants you see here are kunti palms, which are related to a sago palm, which you will find all over Savannah. They're a cycad, and those are one of the oldest living plants. They were around when the dinosaurs were around. So they're really interesting, and they send up little cones by which they seed, and they will start to spread and fill in here as they get some age. This is Thrialis, and it's a tropical. It will get knocked back in a freeze, but you can cut it back hard and it'll vigorously regrow. It puts off a yellow flower, which is really pretty, and it'll last all summer long and into the fall. The other great thing about it is that the deer don't eat it. And Sherry will get deer here as well. They often like to swim across the river and have lunch. This is Crinum. Another tropical. It's a bulb plant, and the flowers are really the star of the show and the whole reason you'd want to grow this plant to begin with. But it can become quite large, and when it's in bloom, it's really quite a showstopper. This Canary Island date palm has been here for a long, long time, as long as we've lived here at Isle of Hope. And it got nipped in the freeze this past winter, so she's had to cut it pretty hard, but it looks to be healthy. And when it really fills out, it really fills out. It's quite a canopy up there, very large and signature tree. This is another olive, much like mine, an Arbequina. She's got a few years ahead of me, so it's doing well. And I'm sure she will be harvesting some olives very soon. Over on this other side here, we have a few plants that I had mentioned at my property. This is soft caress mahonia. Again, she's got a few years on me, and hers don't seem to be getting eaten by the deer, which is the reason she has some of the lovely yellow flowers that they have. Back behind it is dwarf yopon holly, and this is what it does. You can clip it a little more tightly to form a more formal hedge, but it's a great backdrop, evergreen, and it is a variety of a native plant, so it's really acclimated to this setting. This is Laura petalum. It's in the same family as the purple Laura petalum that I showed you at the front of my house. This is green leafed, and it actually has a white flower, not as common as the purple Laura petalums. So again, John providing another special variety to his friends and customers. And there's another special variety. This is a tea olive. And a lot of people around Savannah have tea olives. They bloom in the spring and the fall, and the flowers are so fragrant and they're wonderful. And people will plant them close to their homes because wherever you are, if you're having cocktails or having dinner, you can smell them when they're in bloom. That's a really pleasant smell. This one is an orange flowering variety as opposed to the more common white flowering variety. And John swears you can smell a little bit of the citrus in it. I'm not so sure he's right about that, but it has a great scent regardless, and the flower is beautiful. And here we have a very unusual plant, cardoon, which is related to the artichoke. And the plant itself, the leaves it'll get quite large, but then it'll send up a very tall stalk with a thistle top to it. They're really unusual, quite eye-catching, and certainly a conversation piece. And she has had lots of success because there is a lot of sun right here, and so they've been very happy. And so she tries to plant them year after year. For those of you at home that are watching this, this is a perfect opportunity to point out the pine straw. This may be sort of an unusual mulch for you to see. Here in the South, pine trees are everywhere. So this is a readily available mulch material. It's affordable. It comes in baled units, so it's easy to transport and put in the back of your car or your pickup truck and bring to your property and spread. Basically, you break apart the bale and there's little flakes in there. You pull that apart and spread it out as evenly as you possibly can, and it's usually best to take some water and spray it over the top, and it'll settle down a little bit because it does tend to fluff up a lot when you're spreading it. It works. It's a little bit of an acquired taste, but it is certainly of this place and something that is oft used in a southern garden. We've arrived at the rear of the house, and I wanted to address these two plants in particular. This is an oak leaf hydrangea and a really beautiful specimen. This was here when Sherry moved in, and she's done a really great job of taking care of it. I mean, its blooms are absolutely spectacular, and it's great to see it thriving in her care. And then here is an interesting, this is a dwarf form of the olives that we're seeing. I believe this one is a little ollie. I also have these at my property. I'm keeping them in pots and more of a tighter ball. She's obviously letting hers grow up. They won't get nearly as tall as what you see in the landscape when you let them grow the standard variety to a tree. But it's a great example, I think, the three different forms of how amenable olive is proven to be in handling various situations and pruning practices. So it's really exciting to have these available to us now because they really make a great evergreen landscape plant. Well, thank you for joining me. I hope you enjoyed seeing these gardens and a little bit of Isle of Hope and the outer limits of Savannah. Please stick around. I'll be talking with Robin and answering any of your questions. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Ben.
Thanks
How
for
are
having
you?
me. Great.
Yes, nice to see you.
It was
So we had some questions come in with registrations, and I also want to say we had a couple of alums write that they grew up on Isle of Hope, attended grade school, etc. So there are other who's from that neck of the woods.
yeah, great. Do you want to introduce the questions that came up? Or you want...
Yeah, sure. No, I was going to first ask you the person who said she'd recently relocated to Georgia, and just would like some history on garden designs in Savannah in particular.
So this is a tough one because I'm not a historic, a landscape history expert or major. That's John McKellen, my mentor. So what you really need to do is become friends with John, and then you'll get all your questions answered. But in lieu of that, I do have a collection of books that I sent, and I believe we're going to post, make available to folks, that John
I think Patrick's going to drop it in the chat. Yes.
Okay.
Many of these are books that John gifted to me or recommended to me. Um, and so some of them just talk about general history, and it's a good place to start because a lot of that drives the way that, history will drive the way people garden or what they do with their properties. Um, and so you'll see a lot of similarities. It's not necessarily specific to a place. So there's the history books there that would lend a lot of I guess kind of background and understanding. But two in that are more specific, if she's asking for it's really kind of dial in, working maybe with a historic property. For Every House a Garden by Rudy and Joy Favretti. Rudy was a professor at UConn, which is where John got his master's in landscape history. And he highly recommends anything by Rudy. In this particular book, it's very small, but just kind of briefly goes through why people gardened the way they did on certain kinds of properties and what their goals and intentions. And I think he suggests that there's common threads through. So it's a really helpful one. Deals with a lot of specifics, and then maybe more to the question about Georgia itself. Seeking Eden, a collection of Georgia's historic gardens by Stacy Catron and Mary Ann Eady. This just came out in 2018, so it's a brand new book, but beautifully photographed and goes into lots of properties. Some of them are from Savannah. The governor's mansion up in Atlanta is featured. That would be a really, really great one if she wants to get specific Georgia properties and get an idea of what's out there. Certainly go visit those that you can. Come to Savannah and walk around downtown. I mean, there's tons of beautiful old properties. I can't say that they're all landscaped in a way that's consistent with, what they would have been historically speaking, but you really get a sense of the history of the place walking around downtown Savannah. So come visit.
One of the questions had to do with native plants, and is that something you considered when you were planting your garden, or?
Absolutely. Native planting is kind of a touchy subject because it's hard to define what exactly you mean by native. And I believe that the question really asked about that, whether it was specific to this area in Savannah, or was it more regional, the Southeast? And the answer is yes and yes. It's hard to draw a line and what exactly is native, which makes it kind of a difficult question to answer. But the benefits, of course, of planting native plants is that they belong here and they thrive here and they feed the native wildlife, birds and the deer, and the insects. And so there's a lot of great reasons for planting native plants. And those that I chose when I started out, my daughter was young, Emmeline, and she loved birds, and I needed some kind of guiding light for how I was going to start imagining what this garden would be like. And so I planted a bunch of plants that would draw in the birds. So wax myrtles and yopon hollies have berries that the birds absolutely love. Things that would provide for cover. So yes, I think it's an important consideration. I wouldn't say that you have to be a hardliner on it and plant only native plants. There's a long history of plants moving around the globe. And John pointed out, this is actually really interesting, that plants move very well along the same latitudes. So if you just kind of follow around the globe in a similar latitude, those plants will be able to move. When you start going up and down on the longitudinal lines, so really kind of north and south, it becomes difficult. So you get into the whole USDA plant zones. You see how that plays out. You can often have a similar zone that'll stretch east and west, but they don't. They change fairly quickly, moving north and south. So there's a long history of people moving plants all around the globe, and it's just hard to. Native planting is also difficult to say, well, anything that was planted, let's say after the 1800s, is that native, or does it need to go before people really started moving? It's a difficult concept. I did in the books over here. There's two great books, the Brother Gardeners, and of course the Garden Book by Thomas Jefferson. They both go into moving seeds and plants all around the globe. And it was just a major thing, and people are curious and interested, and they want the latest, and they're exploring new lands, and so there's been a lot of plant movement. So anyway, difficult,
Including
but
your,
yes,
including
native,
your Lambeth fig.
including my Lambeth
Yes.
thing. Yeah, that was a fairly recent move, and here it is now again. So yeah, it's a really big topic. It can get kind of testy at points, but you should consider it. But I wouldn't draw a firm line and say only native plants, because that would be a very difficult thing to do.
Here in Charlottesville, we have a couple of just native plant specific sales every May. It's interesting, just the variety of them. So,
Right, and it's wonderful to go and see them. I've got these Yopon hollies, but they thrive so well, and so there's a lot of benefits. But they also in the wild they'll sucker, and that's how they colonize. The interstitial space between marsh and the forest, and so they become kind of a landscape nuisance, because I got to keep cutting them back and cutting them back because they're just so happy where they are. And so there's pluses and minuses to everything, and that's just the way gardening is. And I guess just
speaking of
roll.
zones, sorry, I
Yeah,
was
yeah.
going to
That
talk about
I was going to segue right into the question about Charleston. Yes,
exactly.
Savannah is now 9A. I believe Charleston is the same. It's warmed from 8B. I certainly can tell in living here for almost 20 years, and spending a lot of time outside in all of those years, it is definitely getting warmer. You can see it in the plant life. You can feel it. So yeah, we've I guess, I don't know if you say dropped a zone or increased a zone. We're hotter. But Charleston is right there with us, and you'll see a lot of similar plantings in Charleston.
People were interested in the olive trees, plants, and wondering how far north can they grow and what sort of soil do they like?
Soil, that's an interesting question. I think most plants like that like slightly acidic. Um, Far north, I believe they can stretch into the eights, maybe 8A. I think if you start getting into the sevens, where you see a lot of hard freezes, they suffer. Obviously, we think of olives and we think of the Mediterranean. So yeah, you got to, they're still somewhat consistent with that conceptually. So yeah, I would think 8A would be pushing it, and sevens are probably, you've got to find a microclimate, you know, west facing wall that's going to really heat up to maybe stretch them through a winter, Northern Virginia, for instance. I think that would be somewhat difficult, but microclimates do exist. And like the fig trees that you see, I know, used to do a lot of listening to garden podcasts and radio shows across the country, California, the Northeast, and back home. People will plant fig trees where it freezes, and they'll either dig them up and put them in a pot and put them in their garage, or there's also a method that I can't believe this works, but I guess it does because they're pretty resilient plants. You cut a good at least 180 degrees around the root ball, maybe even a little bit more, and then they tip the plants down onto the ground and cover it with all the leaves that have fallen in the garden. And so you just put a blanket over it. You're doing this when the plant is dormant, right? So we've kind of already gone into that phase. And when the last average frost has passed, move the leaves and tip the thing back in, and you're back at it again for growing season. I've never seen that done, but a few garden shows that I listen to talk about that regularly. So you can pull stuff off. Elliot Coleman up in Maine, we were talking earlier about Elliot, and he does 4-season gardening in down east Maine, where there's feet of snow. He uses more, I guess, mechanical methods, architectural methods of building greenhouses and things like that. But you can pull stuff off if you're ingenious and adventurous.
Somebody's wondering about Spanish moss, and is there any chance it would survive in Virginia? This person thinks it would look very nice on grounds and on the downtown mall.
No, it's pretty specific to this place. It's an epiphyte, and it just feeds off of the moisture in the air. Y'all don't have enough humidity, and there's even sections of Savannah where it just doesn't grow, and it's a bitter mystery. I've never really heard of a good explanation of why it'll grow in one spot and won't grow in another. But yeah, you really need a lot of humidity, and a killing freeze kind of destroys it. But you can take it with you if you want to use it for bring an empty bag, and I suppose the airlines or somebody won't stop you, but you can collect it, and we use it for ornamentation, like around pots after you planted. We kind of use it as a mulch and shove it in and tuck it in amongst some of the potted plants, and it makes kind of a nice decorative cover. The only concern with it is that it can get red bugs. So a lot of people will recommend that you put it in the microwave and heat it to a point that'll kill the bugs in it. Otherwise, you're in for a very itchy experience. But I think that's usually only if it's fallen to the ground. So if you collect it from the trees, I think there's less of a chance of that happening. But yeah, you're not going to be able to move that one.
Somebody's also asking again about that tree that you mentioned at the second house that had the orange flowers and smells of citrus. Was it a tea?
Oh, the
Do you
tea.
remember the tea
Yeah,
olive? Okay.
Osmanthus fragrans. And the most common one that we have here is a white flowered. That's what you'll find 99.9% of the time, unless you know John McKellen, and he'll find you the orange flowering one. And I do not smell it at all. Maybe somebody with a more sensitive nose. Maybe Sherry. I'll have to ask her the next time I see her if she can smell the citrus in it. But they're really small white flowers. They're not insignificant, but it's pretty close. But they smell incredibly fragrant, and it's just a really, really nice smell. And there's just a kind of a, you can tell the difference. If there's a white, the white one is white indeed, and the orange, you can see the orange in it. But I don't. The fragrance, to me, is the same either way, but it's wonderful.
Also a question here. Have you visited the State Botanical Garden of Georgia in Athens?
I have not.
Okay. They say it's beautiful and
Sure
very
it is.
helpful staff. Could
We've
put
got
that
a
on
great
your list.
down here too. No, I haven't. But it is. I didn't put this on the email, but just a great source. I'm going to read off really quickly, just great garden resources, authors, speakers. From, I think, in New York, Ken Drews has written a lot and does garden talks. He's wonderful. Alan Armitage has some great books. Lee Reich, who's definitely a New Englander, has a lot of books about vegetables and edible gardening and lots of great pruning techniques. I would recommend him. Michael Durr, who was a professor at University of Georgia. He is world famous for the work that he's done, and the botanical gardens, I have no doubt, are feature selections that he's made, has been a source of research for him. Michael Durr, Dirr. If you can find anything by him, it's incredible. It's an incredible reference. He is really, really knowledgeable. The book, and I actually still have it from my, I did take a few landscape architecture courses while I was at Virginia, and I still have my Michael Durr book of woody plants, and I'm not kidding, it's 3 inches thick. It's just plant after plant after plant after plant. But it is a resource I go back to regularly. So he's fantastic. And then if you are local here in the coastal South, Barbara Sullivan has a book garden perennials for the coastal South, which I liked a lot, and she's done a good job. But anyway, since you mentioned Athens, I wanted to bring up Michael Durr.
Yeah, no, that's great. There's a question from somebody. They moved to Burnside Island a little while ago. Can you throw out just a local nursery or two that they could get plants from?
Go to Herb Creek in Sandfly. They are one of my favorites. And Hester and Zipper is also nearby and a good one. A little farther away, but a good friend and was a resource for me while I had the landscaping business, was Secret Gardens. There's 2 locations. Mike Bachelor is the owner. There's a retail location that's on Highway 17. They'll recognize that. And then the original Secret Garden is a little harder to find, and you have to either know them or be a wholesale purchaser to get in there. But they have that's where they keep a lot of their stock for the retail center. So just look up Secret Gardens on Highway 17. But Herb Creek is right nearby. They have 2 locations. One of them is in Sandfly, which is near Burnside, and I would absolutely stop there first because I've loved those guys for years.
Somebody's wondering how you control weeds, and is that just throw some pine straw down or ignore them or?
Everything. It's so hard. That's at least here. And I've listened to a lot of these folks that, rattle off their names, talk about all sorts of methods. And at least in Savannah, we are surrounded by jungle, and things just grow and they grow and they grow. And there's very little stop in the seasons. I mean, we have nothing to mention of a winter. And so that means the weeds too. And it's really challenging. Um, you know, Mechanical removal by hand is kind of the best way because it's the most thorough way of getting them out. I've used Roundup. You want to use it sparingly and only when you really, really need it, but I have used it. But you just got to be careful and you got to know what you're doing, and really limit it to just the real special cases. I know my wife Kathy is watching this and she'll laugh at me because I bought a flame weeder. I listen to all these podcasts and I get all these crazy ideas from other crazy people. And one of the ways of doing weed control is a flame weeder, which is, I mean, it's a roofing torch. It's basically a propane tank that you can either carry around with you or strap onto your back, like you're clearing pillboxes in World War II. And it's got this wand, and you light the end of it, turn on the propane, light the end of it, and then you start walking around your yard looking for weeds. And so what it does is it boils the water in the cells of the plant, and it'll do it rather quickly. You're not really trying to burn the plant itself as much as you're trying to get those cells to burst. So you just hold that flame nearby and it heats up and you see the change in color. It goes from maybe a glossy, shiny green, a healthy looking green, to a really dull, flat green. And that's when you know you've done it. The the thing about it though is that you're walking around, and you saw me talk about the pine straw in the garden. Well, that lights rather quickly. And so more than a few times I've been walking around my yard trying to use this thing, and I've started little wildfires behind me. Of course, I get a rap on the window from Kathy saying, "Hey, idiot, you're starting a conflagration." So I ended up giving that away. I'm on the board of the Savannah Tree Foundation, which is a great organization for those of you that are in the area. Look us up. And they take care of the Candler oak, which is a very significant oak here in Savannah. And it's in a plot of land, but surrounded by roads and parking lot. And so it's contained, and there's nothing planted underneath it, and nor should there be. And so they're now using it to clear the weeds rather than trying to do it mechanically or with chemicals or anything like that. So I'm hoping that that's working for them. So it's now out of my hands. I'm no longer a menace out here on Isle of Hope. And I'm hopefully helping out the Candler oak.
Oh my gosh, that's hilarious. Let's see. Da, da, da. I'm great at killing plants. Overwater, underwater, too much sun, not enough sun, pot is too small. Can you offer just some quick advice on easy to maintain balcony plant? I'm not sure
Um,
where she is, but
I mean, confession, I have killed so many plants. I kept a ledger. I used to, just when I first started. I mean, I guess like Thomas Jefferson, I just started writing down everything that I planted. And then I would also note everything that I killed. And I I have killed a lot of plants. So don't beat yourself up about it. It's not the easiest thing to do, gardening and keeping plants alive. I think even house plants and patio plants are and container plants, really, I guess what I'm saying, are even more difficult. It's less forgiving. It seems like it would be easier because they're right there in front of you. But it doesn't seem to be. It's just because you're dealing with a very limited amount of soil and perhaps less than ideal conditions, because what you think is sunny is not really sunny enough. So a bright window in your house is barely passable from a plant perspective and what they need. So yeah, I would say um, as far as watering, always err on the side of underwatering. Um, the overwatering, that, I mean, it's just so tempting because the plant is right there and you've got a cup of water, or you think you're coming to its rescue and you drown the thing. Um, Try to underwater it, and you can, you know, as a way of testing what the soil moisture should be, because you really you want it to feel like a wrung out sponge, so damp but not soggy. And you can shove your finger in there and get a sense for it that way. You could go really technical and scientific and get yourself a moisture meter. I mean, that would work really well. Another way that works, and it seems like the professionals do it this way, you just learn by weight. And so you can just lift your plants up and tell that, especially if it hasn't grown terribly, if the mass of the plant isn't that much different, then any weight difference is in theory going to be the water content in the soil. And so with a little practice and experimentation, you can get a sense for whether that plant is lacking water or if it's got plenty. Because if it's heavy, I mean, you can feel it. So again, it takes a little practice, and you need to kind of maybe the first time soak the plant, let it drain out for a few hours, and that should be nice, well-watered soil, and then lift it and just see what it feels like, and just kind of commit that to memory. And next time you're wondering, just lift up the plant a little bit and see if, what does it feel like? If you let it go for too long, the soil becomes hydrophobic. And that's where we see where it'll condense and it'll pull away from the inside of the container wall. And then when you show up to rescue it and start watering, the soil is hydrophobic, so it just runs across the top. It goes into that crevice that's now formed and straight out the bottom. And everybody knows or has been told that a well-watered plant, one of the signals is that when it starts leaking out of the bottom, you've done your job. That's all well and good if the soil is all the way to the sidewalls and it's not hydrophobic. If it starts running out immediately, or you should know that you've got an issue. And that will require something more of, along the lines of soaking it for a period of time and maybe stopping up that hole on the bottom, and letting it sit in some water for maybe a few hours and letting it really soak that water back in again, and then letting it drain and just kind of and get back to the normal process. But yeah, I mean, and I'm guilty of it too. I'll show up too late in the game, start watering a plant, and it seems like I've done my work, but it's bone dry in there. It's no longer accepting water, and more needs to be done than just sprinkling even for 5 minutes on it, because it's just not soaking in. It's not in contact with its soil long enough. So watering is difficult. Be aware of the sun. Maybe let your plants go out and play on the patio and the balcony. If they're inside, don't put them right out into bright sunlight or direct sun, because they will scorch because they're used to being inside. Get them in sort of a semi-shaded thing. But if they can go spend a few days out in summer camp, and then before they go back into the, the semi-bright room, that is helpful. Potting too small, I actually think potting too small is better than potting too large, because if you over pot, then all of this other soil that's around the plant will draw all the water away from it, because everything's looking for equilibrium. And so you've got all of this soil that's not really doing any work for the plant that's around it, and it's drawing the water away from it. So I'd actually say that having it up more on the smaller size is better. You will have to bring it out and maybe root prune a little bit from time to time, but yeah, overplanting seems to, or kind of oversizing your pot is actually not a great thing to do. And lastly, balcony plants. So inside, I wrote down, for inside plants, pothos sansevieria, which is mother-in-law's tongue, which is the really snake plant, the really sharp, tall. Those things are very indestructible. And cast iron plant, which is aspidistra. Those do really well. They're hard to kill. Patio plants, it really depends on what's in your, where you are. For instance, I've got some boxwood that I've kind of topiaring outside. I've got a small Japanese maple that I guess I'm doing a bonsai with. I mean, it's still a fairly large 3-foot tree, maybe 4 foot across, but I'm pruning it to keep it in, and that does well. It's in a sort of protected spot for the winter time. What else do I use? I've got some ferns. Those do well here because it's so humid. But yeah, you're looking for dwarf varieties or something that if it does get up to size, you can still keep larger plants, the plants that want to be larger, in small containers, if you'll do a little bit of the work as far as pruning them for size, and then doing root pruning every so often, because they will get root bound, and when that starts happening, then it'll start choking itself out. So a lot can be kept as a patio plant. You just have to do a little bit of work with it.
Another question from someone who has a couple of hydrangeas in pots. You can picture those Mother's Day hydrangeas
Right.
that she would like to put in the ground, and is wondering about just how to grow those successfully.
You probably won't. A lot of those that you get for Mother's Day that come from the grocery store or even the nurseries with these huge, I mean, they're just incredible blooms. They're florist hydrangeas, and they're not really meant to be out in the landscape. I don't think I've ever planted. I think I had a few customers that would plant them. It's so tempting, right? Because you get them and they're beautiful and just put them out there. They may last a season. You might get them into a second season, but they're not really hardy in the way that the landscape hydrangeas are. No reason to not try it. Prove me wrong. Have at it. It's just try. And I would treat them just as you would any other hydrangea. You can play with the pH. I don't know if that works necessarily for all of those florist hydrangeas, but slightly acidic is typically, a soil is typically good. You want to watch the moisture content in the soil. They've got really fibrous roots, so they're easily damaged. So you want to be careful of that. And then at least here, I know you see it. So I'll go up and visit Cape Cod, where my family is up in Massachusetts in the summer times, and the hydrangeas are glorious and absolutely amazing. But even when it gets hot, the leaves will start to flag and they'll kind of droop. That happens every single day here in the summer. Do not, if you're down here in the South, or maybe even in Virginia, if they start to flag at all, don't race out there and go water them, because it's just what they do. It's their defense mechanism from the heat, and they're just containing, they're holding on to as much moisture as they possibly can in the plant. It does not necessarily mean, as a response to the heat, it does not necessarily mean that they are drying out and withering away. And they'll often bounce right back in the morning. It's usually my signal. I used to have a bunch of hydrangeas, and I don't anymore because the deer just take them out. If they did not bounce back first thing in the morning, then that was my signal that they actually need water. So, you know, if they were flagging at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, by 8 o'clock, they were typically back up. Again, if that didn't happen by 7 o'clock in the morning the next day, then okay, then they get some water that day, but not before then, because I didn't want to drown them. And it can easily happen, at least here. But try it. Yeah, don't get discouraged, but yeah, they're not meant to be out in the landscape, but just go for it.
Definitely have been guilty of running out to rescue them with water when they do
Yeah.
that. So I'm so glad to know that.
You can't
Yeah.
help it, but yeah, stay your hand. Don't do it.
That's great. Okay, so for kind of a last question, I know you have some other pursuits now, flying, etc., not spending as much time in the garden, but how much time do you spend now? Did you create a garden that is pretty self-sufficient at this point, or what's your
It
amount of
is.
time in there?
And I give a lot of credit to John McKellen, my mentor, because before I started working with him, my garden had everything, every little experiment I could possibly dream up or try to replicate after hearing from somebody else. I did it. And he, given his affinity for his historic landscape, he does a lot with clipped shrubs and boxwoods, and we use southern yew down here, a lot of shape. And I kind of rolled my eyes at him one day. I was like, yeah, you're just over manicured. And it's just a ton of work. And he said, no, believe me, when you start introducing some of those shapes, not only does it make your garden kind of hold up um, over the seasons, because there's always structure in there. He said, but you don't have to do a lot. You prune those just a few times a year. Because you don't really have to give them crew cuts every single time, but they'll hold their shape and they'll look great most of the year with just very little pruning. And he's right. And you know, you can see maybe some of the architectural features as far as, you know, planting having the wall and the boxwood and some clipped shrubs. I have a lot more now than I ever used to. And I really I think this year I've maybe done 3 hard days of work. It's the end of May, and probably don't have to do a whole lot more until Kathy starts fussing at me that it's not looking as good as maybe it should be. I don't have to
Management.
do a lot. Yeah. It it is holding up. I've planted a lot that doesn't require much in the way. I've got a lot of native plants along the perimeter, so those do great. They're well established. They've been in for probably a decade at this point. I have to do very little with them. I've got live oaks that are very happy here. I've got some camellias that are well established. But the deer have been a real problem. And so nowadays, I really am relying heavily on the podocarpus, which is a southern yew, boxwood, and ornamental grasses. I absolutely love ornamental grasses. And those, they do great all year long. Nothing bothers them. They give a lot of movement to the garden. I've got several different kinds, so it's interesting. And then once a year, and I don't even know if you have to do it once a year, it might be every other year, I just clip them back to a little tuft and they push back up again. So I work on them 1 time a year, and it takes, I don't know, 4 hours. And I can leave all the clippings right there because it just becomes kind of this straw underneath. So yeah, I'm not having to do a lot in the way of maintenance. I have very little lawn. I can handle that with a string trimmer in about 20 minutes. And since it's all enclosed, the neighbors won't complain, so I can let it grow until someone else in the house complains. So I can kind of push that to maybe once a month. Yeah, I'm not doing a ton.
Well, thank you so much for doing this. You packed so much information into that time. It's real, just effortless, just ripping off all the names and all the information. We appreciate it so much. People really enjoyed it. So
Glad to participate. We loved UVA, so any chance to, you know, Kathy and I were both there, and any chance to participate in the the UVA community is a great thing.
Great. Thank you. Look forward to seeing you at a UVA Club of Savannah event.